Okay, the entire history of the world according to Red Food Theory.
This is a planet covered with people, different people, all kinds of people. For thousands of years, all these little people will join other little people to take over other little people. The little
So
people
a
that conquer the
reference
other
to
little people will all use one thing and one thing
entire
only.
history of the world before Math had leaves.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Food Theory, the show that's laying down a trail of breadcrumbs that leads directly to world domination. Today's food theory has been on my bucket list, my breadbasket list, for a while now. And no, it might not be the most searchable. No, it might not be the trending thing on TikTok, but it's always been trending in one place, my stomach. I'm talking about bread. This episode is an homage to the humble loaf from baguette to brioche, soda bread to cornbread, sourdough, ciabatta, challah,
How the world was started because of Red.
chapati, or just those unlimited breadsticks over at Olive Garden. I love them all. And while you might think that it's the pillowy texture I like, the science of baking, or some sort of weird dark lore about the Pillsbury Doughboy,
Nah.
oh no, my friends, my feelings for bread go much deeper. I love bread because bread means one thing.
Power?
There's nothing more powerful in this entire world than the mighty loaf. Who run the world? Bread. You look skeptical. I get it. All you carbophobes out there don't think that you could take over the world using just bread. If you doubt the power of this puffy hot dog holder, that only means
It
one
definitely
thing.
has
Spend the next 18 minutes or so
some
convincing
power
you in
because
the most
of
unhinged way
food
possible
and
that
surviving.
bread is the most powerful substance on the planet. To show you this, I'm gonna have to tell you the entire history of the world in bread. By the time we're done, you'll not only have a new favorite food, but you'll know how to use it to conquer the world. Grab a slice for the road,
Hey,
everyone.
W tutorial.
This one
Let's
is
see.
gonna be a trip. Now, if we're talking about bread conquering the world, we're gonna need to get a little handle on the world itself. So for all of you who weren't finalists in the geography bee in high school, congratulations on doing literally anything else. We're just gonna catch you up here. This
Let's
is
see.
the world. And this, right here, that's me, showing you how to conquer the whole thing with carbs. Your next step will be to forget everything that you learned in 12 years of history class or whatever. The only thing that you really need to understand about history is bread. Bread, like all of us, starts from humble beginnings here in Mesopotamia.
Mesopotamia.
It's 30,000 years ago, and bread
In the Middle
isn't bread
East,
yet.
okay.
It's instead just some random seeds of grain. Here we are, little ancient people, freshly emerging from the primordial ooze, wandering around killing things with sticks and trying to figure out which leaves we can eat. Someone has
Okay,
prepared
so like
to eat
cavemen.
some wheat seeds growing in the wild. They smash them up a little, mix them with some water, and drop them into the fire until they're crispy. Voila, bread. It's
Bread.
not much to look at. It is a weird,
Like I said before, that right there is not bread, honestly. I mean, it is, but is it?
pulpy little cracker, but we love it. Because let me tell you,
Is that just friendly fire?
bugs and leaves.
Never mind.
The record of ruins from this time shows that bread is first found in ceremonial and sacred places, meaning that we thought it was pretty cool. A special awesome little cookie of carbs. And we love these ugly little wheat slabs so much that we're like, hey, what if we stopped wandering around and just waited for more of these wheat seeds to grow?
So then people were like, let's stop walking and let's just sit down, make some bread, eat it, have kids, civilization, society.
So that's exactly what we did. When you learn history, you think people just stopped being nomadic and then started to develop agriculture. But really, it was the other way around. We were like, hey, bit of bread addiction happening here. This is the best thing since sliced itself.
Bread,
We're just gonna
yeah.
sit here until more of it grows. And thus civilization was born because people wanted to eat more toast. From there,
That's pretty fire.
the popularity of bread, like any great celebrity, goes from fact to legend. For
Legend.
ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, wheat becomes deeply entwined with mythology. The Sumerians developed Nisaba, the goddess of grain and writing. She's a very big
Hey, hold up, if they don't have bread, they cannot survive because if there are so many people, they need to eat.
deal. Over time, bread hits the road, carried by the people who are still wandering nomads, all the way over to ancient Egypt, where there are some cool new kids in town calling themselves the pharaohs. Turns out the Egyptians have a little annual event that's pretty helpful for growing wheat. They all live next to this enormous river, the Nile, which was full of crocodiles and baby Moseses, and was also very good at doing one
Baby
thing every year,
Moseses.
having a flood. The yearly flooding of the Nile, which is part of the natural water cycle of the region, ends up leaving behind a massive area full of well-watered crops with no hauling of
The fact that it just floods every single year, kind of, I know it's normal, but it still seems weird. Like it's like it's just a massive flood. But it's a good flood because I know that's gonna
Water
happen. It's not a
necessary.
surprise.
No digging fancy irrigation lines that no one's invented yet to grow these crops, at least
Mm.
until bread comes around. Turns out, people are going to do a lot of things to get themselves more bread, so they invent elaborate irrigation channels.
We're gonna
Now,
get bread,
dams
bread.
that'll be used all over the world for thousands of years, all inspired by everyone's love of growing more bread. The Egyptians are also conducting wild scientific experiments to find more ways to eat bread. Kind of like the Alton Browns of the desert, experimenting with grinding up the
I still don't know who Olton Brown is, but I will look him up later.
actually mixing it with other stuff. Up to this point, most people were just kind of toasting up wheat seeds and packing them together with some water, then scalding the whole thing in a fire to make a flat, crackery little slab. But the Egyptians, they get wild with it. They make a paste out of ground up wheat and water, which they then leave out in the sun, inventing the entire process of yeast fermentation. Now, other civilizations have
I still think yeast fermentation sounds very disgusting, but I guess it's
done
important.
fermentation before. I mean, we've invented beer at this point. We're not
Yeah.
monsters. But this is like a whole new frontier for bread. Like the latest TikTok craze, everyone wanted to get their hands on this bread that actually rises for exactly the same reasons that we follow trends today. The clout. The upper classes can
The
now
clout.
lord over the little peons still eating flatbread made out of yucky barley instead of cool, puffy wheat. Bread
Yep.
is such an
That's why I'm
essential
watching
bread
this.
that becomes completely linked
For
to
the
the
clout.
Egyptian gods, and all religious practices involve offerings of bread. The god Osiris,
Yep.
who is not only the Egyptian god of death and rebirth, but also agriculture, has illustrations showing wheat literally growing out of his body to symbolize the resurrection.
Hey.
In festivals in ancient Egypt, priests bake something known as the divine bread, which is bread in the shape of Osiris, who himself was also bread. We're just gonna go with it. Isis, the sister of
Himself was bread. The god of bread? Really? Okay.
Osiris is the goddess of wheat and barley,
Okay.
and by proxy beer, and is also known as the divine baker. She's supposedly
divine
responsible
baker.
for teaching
Let him
mankind how to
cook.
make bread, really shafting the Sumerians who were doing it 20,000 years earlier. Everyone's
Mhm.
plagiarizing these days. But not only is bread making mythology happen, it's making everything.
Hey, everyone is plagiarizing. Right,
happen.
no.
Want to build a pyramid using slave labor? Gonna have to feed them. Bread's gonna come in handy for that. Want to raise an
Gosh.
army? Just tell them to pack some bread in a spear.
People say the pyramids weren't built by slaves, but that's what we think now.
Go. Want to trade with the nations around you? Here's something that might not have been seen before. It's bread. It turns out the Egyptians could grow bread well, and a lot of it, to feed a lot of people. Admittedly, not everyone needed the whole yeast rising process. The Israelites, for example, are like,
Let's
you guys
see.
are mean. You keep your stupid bread bubbles. We got better things to do. And so
Hey.
they eat their matzah and flee Egypt. But the rest
Matzah.
of the world is like, put that bread in my face right now. Egypt is
Hey, yo,
incredibly
I mean,
powerful
not
because
really.
They have the power of the bread, and this will become the pattern.
So the Egyptians became powerful because of bread? Hey, history. World.
Every other
World
nation
history.
gets and grows a lot of wheat. Just watch, because next, bread does something amazing. It crosses the sea. Well, I mean, the sailors cross the sea. The bread actually lives rent-free on the boats, just like it does in my mind.
Yeah.
And now bread is in Greece. As soon as it hits the shores
Hey,
of
I ate some bread earlier. Pizza. So, it is
bread is
correct.
a hot item, which you can see reflected again in a huge number of Greek myths and gods that all revolve around the power of bread. The main one is Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, agriculture, and specifically
They got something for everything. They got
girl boss
everything.
vibes. The Greeks are like, let's eat bread with every meal, which sounds
Mm-hmm.
like a dream, but it's going to mean that they need a lot more bread. So much, in fact, that in 600 BC, they invent the first ever closed oven specifically for making bread.
So ovens were bread wasn't invented for ovens. The oven was invented for bread. That makes I never thought it was invented for bread, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense that they had to cook it.
Before, people were just cooking everything over open fire pits, which were much less fuel efficient and left less control over the temperature. Using closed ovens, though, the Greeks could suddenly make oodles of bread with less fuel and more consistency,
Evolution of technology because of bread.
allowing them to feed even more people than the Egyptians could. Just like the Egyptians and their irrigation systems, the oven is basically just there so the Greeks can get more bread. And you know what? It works.
That's
In
pretty fire.
168 BC, they developed
Literally
bakers.
fire, but
Before you know it, the bread they make is on its way to Rome and Persia. As people push to the east to get access to the really crazy stuff like salt, they spread bread to the areas that we now know
Salt,
as Western
okay.
Asia. It's here that the new bread making techniques really take off. Wheat is a key part of the Persian
so like Western Asia already had some stuff, so like they kind of just integrated bread into their own culture, so then bread has different culture everywhere.
Empire, especially when it comes to flatbread. They spread flatbread throughout the Middle East and Central
Yup.
Asia because it's durable, it's easy to transport, and it's a cinch to make even when you're traveling without any sort of special equipment.
That's pretty
All you
fire.
need is a really flat rock and a fire to heat it up. At this point, the only nations in the Mediterranean powerful
Do I have a flat rock on here? I don't think I do. I'm not about to make some bread on some
The
rocks.
Greeks and the Persians. So of course, the two of them go to war. Ever heard of Aeneas, the Battle of Marathon? Xerxes, who invaded Greece in the year 300? All that happens, and sure, you can
I
learn all the
think
names
yeah.
of the heroes and the battles and all that stuff. But what it really comes down to is bread versus bread, and who has more bread. And the answer is the Romans. Rome, in their classic move
So the Romans just had better and more bread, so they won. Hey.
of stealing everything from the Greeks, quickly adopts bread as the food source for their new empire and proceed to beat everyone with their awesome new inventions for making more bread. They injected lots of bread references into their own gods, like
So they went to war using bread to like eat, and they had better bread so they could just sustain wars, and then they became an empire. So the bread made the Roman
spirits
Empire,
and the
literally.
cult of Demeter. And while Rome certainly liked the smaller ovens that Greece had come up with, they're like, yeah, but what if we did it bigger?
Better,
And so they made
better,
the first
bigger.
bakery-sized ovens to outfit commercial and government bakeries to supply bread to the masses. And with that,
That's why Italy has so much good bread.
here comes bread's latest play
And
for
also
world
France
domination,
and everyone.
politics. See, the Romans don't win over 2/3 of Europe and that big chunk of Asia and like that massive top section of Africa for nothing. They also don't do it by keeping a massive standing army or holding everyone under martial law. That would be
They-
impossible. No, the way they do it is with bread. The Roman Empire knows that everyone's really into the stuff.
So they control the bread, so then they have all the power, basically,
The
right?
population
Right?
loyal to them, they set up government-sponsored welfare in the form of Kyora Annonai, or a grain dole that provides grain or bread to hundreds of
Yup,
thousands
yup.
of Roman citizens.
They control
You
it.
hear about all those great roads that Rome built back in the day? They did it to transport bread, or at least the wheat to make the
Rome wasn't built in a day, and the Roman roads were just for bread.
bread, which they imported from Egypt, Sicily, and other places across the empire, and then distributed to all the poor of Rome. Guess who's not going to rebel against you? People getting shipments of food from you. Remember, bread is the most efficient, portable, and tasty form of nutrition
That's
the
pretty
world has
fire.
ever seen. All
I
the
mean,
cool kids have it, which means that everyone else wants to be a part of the in crowd and get in on those hot bread trade routes. The populations who receive bread from the empire grow from about 40,000 to about 200,000.
How many people were in the Roman Empire? Like, because I know population has gotten really higher, so like,
And guess what? They stay loyal. Rome's play to win over the world with bread is best known by the phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, a phrase still used to this very day.
because they're not gonna bite the hand that feeds them bread, so they control.
Because there are two things in the world that you need to keep the lowly masses placated. You give them bread, and you keep them entertained. Why? Because bread wins, and when the bread runs out, so does your empire. Back in old Rome, the systems for doling out bread to the
So when the Roman Empire collapsed, they just didn't have any ovens.
masses become incredibly popular, as
Makes
you
a lot
would
of
expect.
sense.
But in the later years of the Roman Empire, their strategy starts to backfire because people simply stop working and instead wait for the emperor to just give them their bread. There's a
Oh.
massive decline in productivity, Roman innovation, and of course, no one
There was no innovation because they already had everything, but like the innovation is how they stay a lot. Like,
wants to join the army
Empire
when they
stays
can sit
alive.
at home and get free stuff all the time. So Rome's footprint begins to shrink when the bread bureaucracy gets bigger than its army. When the edges of the empire
Oh.
start shrinking because like no one's standing out there to defend it, the bread imports stop flowing, the bread doles stop doling.
And then they
and
collapse?
The Roman Empire comes to a standstill to
Collapse
make
into
way for
two?
newer, breadier competitors. From here through about the 1400s, things split a little between East and West, depending on which flavor of Christianity
yeah. So then they're like different cultures.
you pick. There were only two flavors, which put you either landing in the Byzantine Empire or the Holy Roman Empire, both of which are ruled by powerful people. By people, I mean powerful bread. For the Byzantine Empire, which is headquartered in Istanbul, way back when it was Constantinople, not
So
Istanbul.
the people controlled the bread, so they were powerful. Is that what he's saying? I think. If you control bread, you are powerful. Run it, bread. Okay.
Yes, we might be giants. Bread is the most important thing they have. Yeah, sure, they have olives and spices and whatever else from the Greeks, but to feed 1 million people now living in Constantinople, they needed one thing more than anything else. They need bread. The Guild of Bakers in Constantinople are
Oh, so okay, so there were 1 million people in Constantinople. That seems like a lot for that
a
time.
protected group at this time, and no one can interfere with the making of bread in any way because everyone knows that once the bread stops getting made, the city shuts down. The wealthy eat
Yup, that's what I said earlier. Once the bread stops getting made, everything collapses.
the great fluffy bread, the peasants continue to eat hard yucky bread, and the monks are usually on a fast, so that kind of takes care of itself. Meanwhile, over at the Holy Roman Empire,
So the monks were just like, you know what? Since we're fasting, we're not controlled by the bread. I mean, hey.
bread has already been spread to places like Gaul, where people have adopted it immediately because before they were eaten
So like Gaul was France at the time. Hey, I guess so.
porridge. Christianity is the name of the game here, but like the Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians before them, bread still figures heavily into religion, which figures heavily into governing everyone. Give us this day our daily bread. Jesus is the bread of life. Jesus multiplying loaves of bread and Jesus breaking bread with his disciples are all stories and
Breaking
ideas
bread.
that figure heavily at this time. Faithfulness to God is tied to the idea of getting enough bread, especially since everyone from all corners of Europe are eating about 2 pounds of bread every day.
I feel like people. I feel like people in America do the same thing, but like probably like five because we're Americans. I don't know.
Using it as plates, which they call trenches. Bread is so central to both the Holy Romans
Wait, so you use the bread as the plate? That seems disgusting because if you don't have an actual plate, you're okay.
and the Byzantines that governments start stepping in to control it using methods like price fixing. They set the price of bread low enough to be affordable, which was another bread invention that continues to this very day.
Oh, affordable pricing, so they can still sell it, and then they can still have, so they can still retain their power for longer.
Lose the bread, you start losing the power.
Yup.
After a couple centuries of bad plagues,
Let me cook. I'm able to predict this. I'm able to do it.
Byzantium, the vulnerable empire is left open, and some neighbors start conquering the lands that produce the grain. And you know the story by this point.
They
it's the
collapse.
beginning of the end. Slowly, the Byzantines become disorganized and fall to the Turks, who, surprise, surprise, control the grain-making areas of Eastern
And that's why the Turks hate the Greece, or yeah.
in the Middle East. So you get it, right? We've been through what, 5 empires now? I think you're starting to get the picture that bread is responsible for the history of the world. But you know what? I can hear your skeptical comments. Yeah, Matt Pat, but that was then. The world has gone gluten-free at this point. We don't fight with pole arms anymore. Modern people stop caring about bread
We didn't really stop caring. No.
long ago.
No.
Right? Wrong. Throughout the centuries of Gaul, which became what we now know as
France?
the biggest
Yep.
uprisings and rebellions all centered around a shortage of bread.
And then Napoleon. Did that dude Napoleon conquer Europe with the bread?
Rome Rebellion in Lyon in 1529.
Oh, that's way before.
Harvests lead to the working peasants having no bread, so thousands of them break into the city's granaries to take back the grain from the government. 1590, there's a
I really
second
thought that it started to rain. I was like, what?
where normally Parisians are eating 1.5 to 2.5 pounds of bread a day. They become so desperate for bread during the months-long siege, they grind human bones to make bread flour.
Hey,
Ultimately,
that's-
the king surrendering
that's-
and France changing religions. Fast forward to the 1760s.
Let's see,
totally
Napoleon?
unregulated grain production leads to extremely high prices on bread, and people start to starve.
Oh, people were starving because of the high prices. So then the French Revolution happened,
In
right?
1775, people start rioting for bread. This isn't called the French Revolution at the time, it's called
It
the
wasn't.
Flour War, because people are seriously hangry
The
without their baguettes. 1789, you think the storming of the Bastille was all
Baguette, a baguette. I'm sorry,
about
friends.
weapons? It was about getting bread. Sure, the mobs had their torches and their pitchforks,
Is
so you know
it?
what they were looking for? The royal store of grain. They were literally starving. Marie Antoinette
So the royals had all the bread, but they weren't given nothing because of.
painted as a villain when she hears about the flour shortages and famously says, "Qu'il mange de la brioche," which doesn't mean let them eat cake. It actually means
What does it
let
mean?
them eat brioche, which is a luxury form of enriched bread, because bread
Ah.
is still considered to be the be-all, end-all of eating. She probably didn't even actually say this, but the power of a statement about bread is the single most famous and inflammatory quote to come out of the entirety of the French Revolution. But maybe it's just French.
I guess the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars are kind of different because be, hold up, because I think the most famous quote from that time was like, "There is nothing we can do," from Napoleon, right? I don't think he actually said that. He might have actually said that, but not sure.
France, right? They're a bit nutty for their bread. No, not by a long shot. Time to check in on another famous empire,
British?
the British. Sorry, Tom, she's included here as well. The British Empire, famous for taxing early
He doesn't like the British.
the American colonists on tea, actually plagued with another big problem in the years leading up to the American
Less bread.
Revolution: bread shortages. Well, not as famous as the Boston Tea Party. In 1775, thousands of poor American colonists protest from Philadelphia to Salem about the shortages of grain and the incredibly
They didn't have rest, so then they were like, you know what? The British. So let's go, and then we
prices,
created.
most of which are controlled by the British government. In an article by Barbara Clark Smith, she writes, quote, "Thousands were reported clamoring for bread, and crowds escorted a merchant, a butcher, and a speculator accused of raising prices to the city jail. As it
So they got put in jail for raising prices. That's actually hilarious. So now, if you raise prices, you can't get put in
After the
jail. But
Boston 2 years
before,
earlier, crowds assumed the power to identify and punish enemies to the patriot cause. Once again, the enemy of the bread
Patriots.
is the enemy of the people. And wouldn't you know it, one little revolution later, and things really start taking off for that new country of America. And why is that?
So the people didn't have bread. So then they put the people in jail who made it so they couldn't have bread. So then they started a country, the United States. I'm in the United States, and yeah,
Because wheat is produced in almost every state in the entire country. America. And why is that? Because wheat is produced in almost every state in the entire
entire country.
Heck, we have a specific region called the Wheat Belt. We're always singing about our amber waves of grain. Think it's
Makes sense. We are built on the bread.
an accident that the U.S. became a global superpower over the last
Nah.
100 years? It shouldn't be when you look at how much bread we have. Today, we
Hold
export almost 50 million tons of wheat.
How much
every
is that
year. Let's just say that
proportionally?
producing wheat can get pretty heated, so I'm not going to be going into all that. But to give you an indication, the U.S. government has paid out over $48 billion in wheat subsidies since
Damn,
1995 to
48.
wheat production in this country because, once again, say it with me, bread,
Bread is power.
Whew, and with that, we are at the present day. Whew, that took a lot out of me. I hope I've convinced you now that the entire history of the world comes down to bread, and all you have to do is follow who has the bread at any given time. But if you've been watching this channel for a while, you should probably be asking yourself one thing. Why bread? Like, why? Why not any other
Rice?
food
Rice?
in the
Rice?
entire world? Sure, bread's delicious, but so are baked potatoes, and you can grow those pretty easily. So are beans, and, no, beans suck. But you can grow them.
Damn,
Why not
that's
something
nothing.
like the legume civilization? That's a question that was on the mind of one particular cultural anthropologist, Dr. James C. Scott of Yale University.
So let's see what he
He wrote
cooking.
an entire book observing that if you wanted to build an early civilization, you needed to have a grain-based economy because grain was the only way to have an economy in the first place. If you notice
Okay,
something
let's
about this
see.
episode, it's that people used bread to get what they wanted. Sure, they ate the bread, but they also traded bread to get everything else they needed. You see,
So they trade bread to get power and that type of
at the
stuff.
end of the day, bread isn't just the food source of all these civilizations, it's also the,
The money.
currency. Sure, they may have had gold coins or fancy little francs or whatever, but that's all bogus if everyone is starving. Bread is power
If everyone is starving, no one cares about money. All they need is food. And then if you give them food, they're chilling.
because bread is literally money that you can eat. And the rulers of all these empires, they know that. Remember, most of these empires relied on giving free bread to people. Grain was the basis of taxation in all these empires because in order to give food
Taxation.
to people who don't have it, you need to take it away from the people who do.
Do.
And why are you taking grain? Well, grain like wheat is special for three big reasons.
Let's
First,
see.
it's transportable. You need it if you're going to have a big empire with a huge transportation network for food. And what makes
Think-
something easy
So the big empires need to transport the bread. And I think the next is it's very easy to digest or something, or it's yeah. I don't know. It's something about digestion.
transport. Number two, being light and dry. So it's not going to rot and you won't be carrying around a whole bunch of water weight. Immediately you can start to see from these criteria that crops like potatoes, lotus roots, most other root
Those aren't-
veggies, they're all
those aren't
out. Potatoes
capable.
are 70 to 80% water by weight. And water, it's heavy. They didn't have dehydrated instant flakes back in the day, which also meant that they weren't able to easily divide up something like a potato. Wheats and grains,
Ah.
they're very divisible. You can
So they were able to divide it up, cook it, eat it, move it.
weigh them out down to the 10th of an ounce so you know exactly how much you're getting or how much you're giving away when you're portioning out doles to the peasants. It also grows number 3 above ground, which doesn't seem like it should be that big of a deal, but it's everything to these empires.
Let's see.
Remember, the entire idea of a central government only exists if that government's able to collect taxes from the citizens. Again, these
So they
taxes
can't
are money
tax
in
it.
crops. When someone's growing wheat, they can't hide it. You can literally see the wheat growing months before harvest season.
Ah, so you would be able to grow something else, and then
So a tax assessor can
Hide
come
it.
on by and estimate a farmer's yield for the year. Then you come by at the same precise time every year and you take your cut right as everything's getting harvested. Potatoes, root veggies, some beans, they're not visible. They're grown
so they're able to tax them easier, and then give out the bread so they could have power.
underground or very close to the soil. That means that farmers can more easily hide them from the government. They can tell the tax collector, "Oh, yeah,
There's no one-
we
there's
ourselves
nothing
a
here."
Terrible harvest this year. Barely any potatoes, but here's your 10%, I guess." And the tax collector would have no way to know if they were lying. They're a great
They
fraud
can't
if you're
know.
a tax evader, which means that they're terrible if you're a government,
Government.
trying to collect taxes. A terrible example of governments only being interested in wheat happened during the Irish potato famine of the 1840s.
The potato famine made it so the government didn't care about it because they're potatoes, so they can't tax
During
them.
this time, it's well known that the Irish were super reliant on potatoes as one of their only food sources. And
Yeah.
there are lots of reasons for that, but any idea why they didn't have any wheat around during this period? Well, they
Let's
did,
see.
but a large portion of it was being exported to the British for compulsory payments to the government, who
A lot of stuff is the British's fault.
owned Ireland at the time. So,
Yep.
because wheat was easy to transport, the British were more than happy to take it all, while the hundreds of thousands of Irish people died because of the
Damn.
failure of their less taxable potato crop. So, there it is, we're done. Wheat runs the whole
Whole
world.
world.
What? I didn't talk about the whole world? I forgot about all those other
He didn't talk about Australia, South America, China, Japan, South Korea, Russia, South Africa, and the southern part of Africa.
continents like South America, the entire eastern part of Asia,
Yup.
most of the continent of Africa,
Yup.
all of Australia.
Yup.
Yeah,
Yup.
you're right. I didn't actually forget about them, but I did focus on
Let's
the areas
see.
of history that this audience is probably most familiar with. But that's not nearly the end of the story, so here's how the mighty bread plays out in the rest of the world. The
Let's
secret,
see.
friends, is this. Having wheat in your country isn't about being smarter than other countries around you. It's not about having better weapons or more technology or whatever. It's all luck. The reason Central and Southern Africa didn't figure heavily into
So they just got lucky that they had the
the
wheat.
bread wars over the last few thousand years is that these areas weren't well suited for growing grains. Wheat, as it turns out, is a little bit picky about where it grows, and it
So they couldn't really get powerful like the up here. So like so since they didn't have wheat, they kind of just like stayed chilling and did not have technology.
climates and loamy soil. That's great if you're in the Fertile Crescent, but crummy if you're in the Ivory Coast. If you look at the world map of where
Let's
grains
see.
grow on this planet, you'll notice a few
Hold up. China, that had a lot of good stuff throughout history. India,
conspicuous
Europe got that. A lot of, and then the U.S. All the most powerful countries had the red.
notably in a huge part of South and Central America, as well as a huge
Nothing.
portion of the African continent, northeastern Asia, and in Central Australia. Primarily because most of these places, they're too hot. So you can see that these areas won't be able to come into power using bread alone like us cheaters in Europe, North America, and Central
Yep, that's
America.
what I just
Stories
said.
play out much like our own, only using
Are we not gonna talk about the Chinese? I mean,
a different cereal crop, corn. Corn, or maize, if you're not speaking American English, was a staple crop of Mesoamerican civilization
Okay, let's
over
see.
yonder in Central and South America. As we've said repeatedly throughout this episode, the history of civilization is really the history of grain.
Bread,
Again,
or
offering
grain.
those three advantages that you associate with the grain. It's easily transportable, it's easily measurable, and it's clearly visible to keep farmers from evading their taxes.
so you can't evade your taxes while growing
And
grain.
much like the Greeks
Basic.
and Romans infused wheat into their mythology, Mesoamerican mythology swaps all of that out with corn. The Aztecs had Centeotl, the maize god, who we see surrounded by corn, while the
So they were powerful in their own way. Corn.
Mayans take the idea of grain, and specifically maize, and turn it into the building block of human civilization. Literally,
That's
where the
pretty-
Mayan
so
creation myth
that's pretty
begins
cool.
With humanity literally being sculpted from dry corn. And just like other civilizations, they had other options to choose from, like potatoes. But freeze drying these to make
They-
them transportable
they're not
took
able
incredibly
to
long
transport
time.
'em.
Whereas corn, it could be dried right on the stalk. After the decline of the Mayans and Aztecs, largely because of changes to the climate that kept them from producing enough corn, you see the Incas.
So it's just too hot in just so many places.
Further south in Peru, spreading their influence, knowledge, and culture through, say it with me now, bread.
Bread.
Only this time it was bread made from corn. The Incas were master agricultural engineers, and rather than just outright conquering neighboring people groups, they just
Cool,
showed
let's
up
see.
and said, hey, how about we help you grow better corn? And everyone's like, yeah.
Hey, here's corn, and then you're able to eat it. Conquering. No.
I'll take that. And the Incan Empire thrives until the Europeans show up and ruin everything like they tend to, bringing it all
Makes
back
sense.
together into one unified timeline. On the other end of the world, stay with me here, this is gonna get tricky. The same thing
happens
again.
then.
Zooming in on the other side of the ocean and looking at
This is the exact same thing happens to China, India, and Australia.
that grain map again, you get a big old pocket in this middle
Yep.
area of China that's a good place to grow grain.
Yep.
That's why grain appears right there on the national emblem of China. Except this time we're not talking about wheat or corn, we're talking rice. Well, the ancient Egyptians were becoming an early major
I was talking about rice earlier. I was just waiting, like, where's the rice at? Like, I love rice.
civilization through the power of wheat. Asia had a growing empire of its own in what we now know as modern-day China. And just like civilizations took off in ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt because the conditions were just right for
Right.
growing grains, we can see a similar pattern throughout Asian history. If
Ah, so they weren't talking about bread before. They were talking about just grains in general. So like grains are wheat, corn, and rice.
If you wanted to support a government that could collect taxes and efficiently distribute food as a resource, you needed to
Hmm.
have conditions that were right for grains. Enter the balmy, humid Yangtze River Valley, perfect for
Let's
rice
see.
cultivation and the cradle of Chinese civilization, in much the same way that the Fertile Crescent was for Mesopotamia. You may have heard about the Three Kingdoms period in ancient Chinese history, where three
Hmm.
rival states existed: the Shu, the Wu, and the Wei. It probably comes as no surprise
I'm
that
pretty sure there were a lot of Chinese civil wars.
each of these three
Yeah.
kingdoms, you can trace the source of their power to some ideal condition that allowed them to cultivate rice. Shu had the Sichuan Basin, Wei had the Yellow River Valley, and Wu had the lower Yangtze River. In the same
Wait, I'm pretty sure that river also went
Shu
through
had the
this.
Sichuan Basin, Wei had the Yellow River
Well, I
Valley,
guess
and
they
Wu
had
had
the
lower
most of it.
Yangtze River. In the same way that grain was a source of government power in the Western world, rice
Mhm.
and the conditions for growing it represented power in the Eastern world. I'm not sure rice isn't always made in
West
bread,
versus
it's made
East.
into buns and noodles and all kinds of bread.
Noodles.
It also functions in the same way as bread, and most importantly of all, drives the same power dynamic that fuels everything in history. So there you have it, friends. The history of the world is all just bread. In the future, is it possible
Well, also grains, but that's less
that the
interesting
history of the
title.
world will still rely on something as simple as bread, even in the face of all the weapons and technology and
Mhm.
AI and Amazon? Yeah, I think it will. Follow the bread, and you'll always see who's in the power seat. Now, if you'll excuse me, after making it through the last few
That was pretty
tens of
fire.
thousands of years of history, I want a little slice of toast.
I hope
And
you
as
guys
always,
learned
my
something.
friends, remember, it's just a theory. A food
Brood theory.
Volume
Thanks for
two.
the teat.